Peleliu Island, Palau Islands, the 28th of September, 1944. The air in the cave was thick enough to drink, a vile cocktail of cordite, stale sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. Sergeant Kenji Tanaka pressed his back against the rough-hewn coral, the rock still warm from the day's oppressive heat. He listened, not with his ears, but with the soles of his feet, feeling the distant, rhythmic thud of American artillery walking its way up the ridges of Umurbrogol Mountain. They called it the Pocket. To Tanaka and the men of the 14th Infantry Division, it was home, fortress, and tomb, all in one. He and his squad were ghosts in this machine of rock and shadow, masters of the patient defense, devotees of a tactical doctrine honed over centuries of conflict. They were superior. They knew this with the certainty of faith. Their spirit, their Yamato Damashi, was a weapon the clumsy, soft Americans could never comprehend. Yet, even in the humid darkness, a seed of doubt had been planted by a sound. It was an ugly, mechanical noise. Not the disciplined, high-pitched chatter of their own Type 99 light machine gun, nor the terrifying saw-like rip of the American M1000, 919. This was a slower, heavier, almost arrogant sound. Thump, 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 thump. A brutish, rhythmic hammering that spoke not of tactical precision, but of industrial violence. It was the sound of the M1000, 918 Browning automatic rifle, a weapon that embodied the baffling American philosophy of war. It was a 20-pound cudgel in a world of finely forged katanas, and it was the instrument that would teach Sergeant Tanaka and the Imperial Japanese Army that the spirit of the warrior was ultimately no match for the mathematics of the factory. This was not a war of soldiers, they would come to learn, but a war of systems. It was a conflict in which the abstract power of a nation's industrial base could be focused into a single steel tube held in the hands of one man and unleash a storm of metal that could obliterate an entire squad of Japan's finest sons in the space of 3 seconds. Tanaka held up a hand, and the 5 men of his forward ambush team froze. They were shadows within shadows, their breathing controlled, their bodies as still as the limestone formations around them. Private Matsuo, barely a man at 18, clutched his Arisaka rifle so tightly his knuckles were white. Corporal Honda, a veteran of the fighting in China, had a string of grenades looped over his chest, his face a placid mask of fatalistic calm. They were positioned perfectly, just inside the mouth of Cave 207C, a narrow fissure that opened onto a steep jungle-choked ravine. Below them, a trail, churned to mud by the rains and the endless shelling, snaked its way toward the next ridge. For 2 days, they had watched American patrols use this route. They moved with a casual, almost sloppy arrogance, their voices loud, their movements wasteful. They were merchants, not soldiers, soft boys raised on milk and beef, bereft of the spiritual fortitude that defined a true warrior. The plan was simple, elegant in its deadliness. They would let the point man pass, then Honda would throw his grenades to shatter their formation. As the survivors scrambled for cover, Matsuo and the others would open fire from the darkened cave mouth, their targets silhouetted against the jungle light. Tanaka, positioned deeper in the tunnel with a Type 99, would cut down any who tried to flank them. It was a classic ambush, a test of discipline and patience against an enemy who possessed neither. They would kill a dozen of them and melt back into the labyrinth of Umurbrogol before the Americans could even bring their vaunted artillery to bear. The sound came first. Not the crunch of boots on mud, but the clank of gear and the murmur of voices. They were close. Tanaka risked a glance through a narrow firing slit he had chipped in the rock. He saw them, 6 of them, moving in a loose file. They were enormous, their uniforms soaked with sweat, their faces red and grimy under their heavy helmets. One man carried a box of ammunition, another had a radio, its antenna whipping back and forth. Then Tanaka saw him, the 3rd man in the line. He was bigger than the rest, a veritable giant, and he carried the source of that ugly sound. The Browning automatic rifle was slung across his chest, its weight seeming to mean nothing to him. It was a monstrous weapon, more machine part than rifle, a slab of milled steel and wood with a thick barrel and a heavy rectangular magazine jutting from its belly. It was artless, crude, an aesthetic offense to Tanaka, whose own Type 99 was a thing of balanced, lethal grace. Honda's hand tightened on the pin of his first grenade. Tanaka gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Patience. Let them walk into the heart of the trap. The Americans drew level with the cave mouth, seemingly oblivious. The point man glanced toward the dark opening, his eyes scanning, but he saw nothing. He was 20 feet past. Perfect. Honda began to pull the pin. What happened next defied all of Tanaka's experience, all of his training, all of his beliefs about the nature of combat. The big American with the BAR didn't wait for an order. He didn't seem to aim. He simply stopped, swiveled his hips, and brought the weapon to bear. There was no warning, no shouted command. There was only the sound. Thump, 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 thump. It was not a volley of individual shots. It was a physical force, a torrent of energy that slammed into the cave mouth. The sound in the open ravine was a heavy hammering. Inside the confined limestone tunnel, it became a deafening, apocalyptic roar that vibrated through the rock and into the very marrow of Tanaka's bones. He saw the muzzle flash, a brilliant, pulsating orange that turned the darkness into a strobing nightmare. Hot brass casings, each the size of a man's thumb, ejected in a blur, clattering against the unseen walls. But it was the effect, the sheer, brutal effect of the burst, that shattered his world. Corporal Honda was not hit. He was erased. The stream of heavy, .30 caliber bullets struck him in the chest and simply disassembled him. His body jerked backward, as if hit by a cannonball, a red mist exploding from his torso. The grenades on his chest, miraculously, did not detonate. They were just gone, ripped away with the flesh and bone they had been strapped to. Private Matsuo, beside him, managed to fire a single, panicked shot before the stream of lead found him. It tore through his thin neck, and his helmet flew off as his head was nearly severed from his body. The other 3 men in the ambush team were annihilated in the same instant. The bullets, massive, 30-06 Springfield rounds, didn't just pierce. They smashed, they tore, they pulverized. They hit the coral walls behind the men and didn't just ricochet. They exploded, blasting shards of razor-sharp rock in every direction, creating a secondary storm of projectiles. Tanaka, further back, was thrown to the ground by the concussion. The air was sucked from his lungs, replaced by a choking cloud of rock dust, cordite, and the atomized blood of his men. The roar stopped as suddenly as it began. The 20-round magazine was empty. The entire event had lasted no more than 3 seconds. In the ringing silence that followed, Tanaka could hear a single, steady, dripping sound. He realized it was the blood of his 5-man squad, draining onto the cave floor. He crawled forward, his ears screaming, his mind a blank slate of shock. He peered past the mangled remains of his comrades into the light. The big American was already reloading. He did it with a practiced, almost casual economy of motion. He slapped the release lever, dropped the empty magazine into the mud, and pulled a fresh one from a pouch on his belt. He slammed it home with the heel of his hand, pulled the charging handle, and was ready to fire again. He hadn't even broken stride with the patrol. He took a few steps forward, then paused, cradling the bar as he scanned the jungle ahead, his expression one of mild boredom. He had not just killed 5 elite soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army. He had performed an act of industrial pest control. It was not combat. It was an extermination. The American hadn't won a fight. He had solved a problem. The problem was the dark hole in the rock. The solution was 20 rounds of 30-0. 6 ammunition applied at a rate of 550 rounds per minute. And as Sergeant Tanaka stared at the unrecognizable pulp that had been his squad, a horrifying new calculus began to form in his mind. They were not fighting soldiers. They were fighting a machine. Days bled into a week of constant, grinding attrition. Tanaka, and the remnants of his platoon, fell back deeper into the Umurbrogol pocket, a honeycomb of interconnected caves, pillboxes, and tunnels that Colonel Nakagawa had vowed would be the Americans' graveyard. But the graveyard was rapidly filling with Japanese dead. The fighting was nothing like they had trained for. Their doctrines of infiltration, of the swift bayonet charge, of trading land for blood, were rendered obsolete by the sheer mechanical violence of the enemy. The Americans did not fight for ridges. They pulverized them. They didn't storm caves. They sealed them with bulldozers, or filled them with liquid fire. And everywhere, there was the sound of the bar. Tanaka found himself in the command bunker of his company commander, Lieutenant Watanabe, a man whose family had been samurai for 500 years. The air was foul, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and medical disinfectant. A single bare bulb, powered by a sputtering generator, cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, where maps of the island were pinned next to inspirational calligraphy proclaiming, "Certain victory." Watanabe was staring at a captured American weapon that his men had dragged back from a failed night attack. It lay on a wooden crate like a profane idol, an M1918, a 2 Browning automatic rifle. "Look at it, Sergeant," Watanabe said, his voice a low rasp. He gestured with a bandaged hand. "It is everything they are. Heavy, crude, no elegance. It weighs 9 kilograms. Our Type 99 weighs 10, but it is a true machine gun, fired from a bipod, meant for precision. This is a monstrosity. They expect one man to carry this into an assault." Tanaka knelt and ran a hand over the weapon's steel receiver. It was cool to the touch. It was brutally simple, a testament to function over form. There were no unnecessary parts, no delicate mechanisms. It was a tool designed for a single purpose: to throw the heaviest possible piece of lead, as quickly as possible, from the shoulder of a walking man. "Their ammunition, Lieutenant," Tanaka said, picking up a single, massive cartridge from a captured magazine. "This is the heart of it." He placed it next to a 6.5mm Arisaka round from his own rifle pouch. The difference was stark. The Japanese round was slender, almost delicate. The American, 30-06. Springfield was a titan, a thick brass cylinder holding a heavy 150-grain bullet. Watanabe had found a tattered American field manual, its pages swollen with moisture. He had a corporal who had studied English at a mission school, painstakingly translating passages under the dim light. "The numbers are here," Watanabe said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Listen to this. Tanaka, the mathematics of our defeat." He began to read from the corporal's notes. The muzzle velocity of the American round was over 2,800 feet per second. Its kinetic energy at the muzzle was almost 2,600 foot-pounds. The 6.5mm Arisaka, by contrast, produced a comparatively gentle 1,900 foot-pounds. It was a fine cartridge for a bolt-action rifle at long range, designed to wound and tumble. The American round was not designed to wound. It was designed to shatter, to tear through flesh and bone, and whatever cover a man might be hiding behind. It was a round born of a country that had endless resources of brass, lead, and smokeless powder. "One round has more energy than a strike from a sledgehammer," the corporal whispered, his face pale. "And this weapon fires 550 of them in a minute," Watanabe continued, his voice barely audible. "The magazine holds only 20, yes. But they train their gunners to change it in 3 seconds. The assistant gunner carries 12 full magazines in a bandolier, 240 rounds, ready at any moment. And behind him, in the squad, the riflemen carry more. They speak of a basic load of ammunition that is beyond our comprehension." Tanaka thought of his own ammunition discipline. Every soldier was issued 120 rounds, and every round was expected to find its mark. To waste a cartridge was a sin. He remembered seeing the Americans firing into the jungle at shadows, at noises. They used ammunition the way they used water, as if it were drawn from an infinite, inexhaustible well. "This man, John Browning," Watanabe said, tapping the manual. "He designed this weapon before the First World War. It is not new technology. They have simply perfected the system of its production and its use. The manual says the United States entered the war with 52,000 of these rifles. They are now producing them at a rate of thousands per month at factories called Winchester, Colt, and Marlin Rockwell. How many Type 99 seconds did our arsenals produce last month, Tanaka? 500? 600? The room was silent save for the chugging generator. The truth was settling upon them, as heavy and suffocating as the limestone mountain above. They had spent their lives perfecting the art of the duel. They had honed their spirits, mastered their weapons, and practiced their tactics until they were second nature. They saw war as an extension of will, a contest of courage and discipline where the spiritually superior man would always triumph. They had prepared for 1,000 duels, a series of individual contests of honor and skill. But the Americans had not come for a duel. They had come to demolish a mountain. They had brought the tools of industry to a contest of the spirit. The BAR was not a rifle. It was a portable, shoulder-fired assembly line for death. Its brutish thump, thump, thump was the rhythm of a factory stamping out parts. Its power was not in the hands of the soldier who held it, but in the mines that produced the ore, the foundries that forged the steel, the chemical plants that mixed the powder, and the logistical chain of ships and trucks that carried it all across an ocean to this forsaken rock. Tanaka looked at the calligraphy on the wall. Certain victory. It seemed a mockery now. He thought of Corporal Honda, a man who could strip and reassemble a Type 99 blindfolded, a man who had killed a dozen Chinese soldiers with his bayonet alone. Honda had been a master swordsman, and the bar had been a steam hammer. The contest was over before it began. "We cannot win this," Tanaka said quietly. The words felt like treason, like a betrayal of everything he had ever been taught, but they were also the purest truth he had ever known. Lieutenant Watanabe slowly closed the manual. He stared at the weapon on the crate, his samurai bloodline and centuries of warrior tradition crashing against the hard, cold reality of this piece of American machinery. He did not get angry. He did not despair. A strange, serene look of utter clarity came over his face. "No, Sergeant," he said. "We cannot win. We can only choose how we die. Our task now is to make the price of our deaths as high as possible, to show these industrialists that spirit still has meaning, even in defeat." But as he spoke, neither man could ignore the dull, rhythmic hammering that echoed from the ridges above the sound of the factory, methodically, unstoppably, going about its work. The psychological collapse was as swift and total as the physical destruction of Honda's ambush squad. The doctrine that had sustained them, the unwavering belief in their own spiritual superiority, evaporated in the face of overwhelming, impersonal firepower. The sound of the bar became a Pavlovian trigger for dread. Its slow, deliberate rate of fire was somehow more terrifying than the faster machine guns. It sounded personal, methodical, like a giant hammering nails into their collective coffin. Japanese tactics, predicated on closing with the enemy to employ the bayonet and grenade, became a form of ritualized suicide. Tanaka watched from a concealed pillbox as another company attempted a night charge against an American position on Hill 140. It was supposed to be a silent, swift infiltration, culminating in a final, glorious banzai cry. But the Americans were not asleep. Their lines were studded with listening posts and trip flares. A flare popped, bathing the jagged coral landscape in a ghastly white light. It caught the charging Japanese soldiers in silhouette, their bayonets gleaming. For a heart-stopping second, there was silence. Then the bars opened up. From a dozen points along the American line, the heavy thump, thump, thump began. It was not a panicked spray of fire. It was a coordinated, interlocking field of grazing fire, low to the ground. Tanaka saw his countrymen mowed down like wheat before a scythe. Men were cut in half, their bodies flung backwards, their triumphant cries turning into screams that were abruptly silenced. The charge did not even get within 100 yards of the American foxholes. It was simply erased from the battlefield, a wave of brave men broken and annihilated against a wall of lead. Tanaka felt nothing but a cold, hollow emptiness. He was witnessing the tragic farce his lieutenant had predicted. They were not dying for the emperor. They were feeding themselves into a machine. The futility bred a quiet, corrosive despair. The men in the caves grew gaunt, their uniforms hanging off their frames. Dysentery and thirst were rampant. But worse than the physical decay was the spiritual rot. The confident arrogance was gone, replaced by a sullen, fatalistic silence. Men stopped cleaning their rifles with the same meticulous care. The nightly readings of the Imperial rescript to soldiers and sailors, once a source of immense pride and motivation, became a hollow ritual. How could they listen to words about the power of the Japanese spirit when that spirit was being systematically ground to dust by sheer industrial tonnage? Tanaka saw it in their eyes. The bright fire of fanaticism was gone, replaced by the dull, hunted look of prey. They were no longer tigers in their lair. They were rats in a trap, waiting for the exterminator. They fought on, because that was all they knew how to do, but the belief in victory was dead. They fought now only for a clean death, but even that was denied them. They were not killed in honorable duels by a worthy foe. They were blown apart by artillery they never saw, incinerated by flamethrowers that reached into the deepest recesses of their caves, or scythed down by the casual, almost contemptuous bursts of the Browning automatic rifle. One afternoon, Tanaka was ordered to retrieve water from a cistern in a contested sector. He moved through a communication trench, the air thick with the stench of death. As he passed a side tunnel, he heard a man weeping. It was Private Matsuo's replacement, a young soldier named Kenjiro. He was sitting on the ground, his rifle in pieces before him, rocking back and forth. "I can't get it clean," Kenjiro sobbed, scrubbing at the rifle's bolt with a filthy rag. "The dust, the coral dust gets in everything. It will jam. It jammed yesterday." Tanaka knelt beside him. "Let me see." He took the bolt. It was gritty with fine, powdered limestone. "You have to use less oil. The oil traps the dust." Kenjiro looked up, his face a mask of hopeless terror. "What does it matter, Sergeant? I clean it, and we go out there, and the hammering begins. Thump, thump, thump. You don't even see them. You just hear the sound, and then your friends are gone. We are ghosts. We are already dead. We just haven't fallen down yet." Tanaka had no words of comfort. The boy was right. The certainty of their doom was absolute. He helped Kenjiro reassemble the rifle, his hands moving with the practiced ease of a decade of soldiering. But the action felt meaningless. He was maintaining a relic, an artifact from a forgotten age of warfare. It was a beautifully crafted tool for a type of conflict that no longer existed. He handed the rifle back to the boy, a useless talisman against the industrial storm that was coming for them all. The war was over. All that remained was the dying. The reflection in the polished steel of the train window showed an old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his hair a thin white frost. I barely recognized the Sergeant Kenji Tanaka, who had once hidden in the caves of Peleliu. That man was a ghost, buried on a forgotten island along with his comrades and his beliefs. I was someone else now, a foreman at the Isuzu factory in Kawasaki, a builder of trucks that helped resurrect the nation he had once fought to defend. For 30 years, I had dedicated myself to the new Japan, the Japan of industry, of logistics, of production quotas, and technological innovation. In a way, I had joined the enemy. I had embraced the very system that had defeated me. Every year, on the anniversary of the surrender, I took the train to the shrine at Yasukuni. Not to pray for the souls of the war dead, I had made my own peace with them in the quiet darkness of my memory, but to remember. To force myself to confront the brutal, clarifying truth that had been revealed to me in a flash of cordite and blood in Cave 207C. After our surrender on Peleliu, the few of us who survived were taken to a prisoner of war camp. The experience was the final, crushing blow to our ideology. We were not beaten, or starved, or executed. We were processed. We were deloused with chemical sprays, given clean clothes, and housed in barracks with cots and blankets. We were fed 3 times a day, meals with more calories than we had seen in a month of combat rations. They gave us coffee and cigarettes. Their kindness was more devastating than their cruelty would have been. It was the kindness of a master to a defeated animal, a casual, thoughtless generosity that stemmed from an abundance so vast it was incomprehensible. They were not our rivals. We were not even their equals. We were a problem they had solved, and now that the problem was solved, they were inexplicably, terrifyingly benign. I saw their logistical system up close. The lines of trucks, the mountains of crates, the endless procession of ships in the harbor. I saw them use bulldozers as casually as we used shovels. I saw them discard perfectly good equipment because it was easier to get a new one than to repair the old. They had not just defeated our army, they had rendered our entire world view, our entire national existence, irrelevant. We prided ourselves on our ability to endure hardship, to make do with less. The Americans had made hardship obsolete. They had triumphed not through a superior fighting spirit, but by creating a system that eliminated the need for one. I often think back to that cave, to the moment before the burst. We were so confident, so sure of our skill, our courage, our righteous cause. We believed we were the finest soldiers in the world, the spiritual heirs to the samurai. We had trained our entire lives to be perfect swords, honed to a razor's edge. And in a duel, man to man, perhaps we were, but we were fools. We had brought our swords to a fight against a foundry. We thought we were fighting soldiers, soft, clumsy merchants who lacked our iron will. But we were not fighting the soldiers. We were fighting the factories that armed them, the farms that fed them, the schools that taught them, and the boundless, arrogant optimism that fueled them. We were fighting the American system, a thing we could not comprehend, and the terrible, rhythmic chug-chug-chug of that Browning automatic rifle was its voice. It was the sound of their assembly line, methodically delivering death, wholesale, across an ocean. We had prepared for a war of the spirit. They had unleashed a war of brute, mechanical mathematics. And in the face of that unforgiving arithmetic, our spirit was reduced to nothing. It was not a defeat, it was an audit, and we were found wanting.